Growing up, David Hummert treasured the happy times he spent with his family.
We did a lot of things together. Went on family trips, go camping, we did family reunions together.
Especially with his mother, Charlene.
She was just a good person, and she brought the family together.
But when a stranger threatened to tear the family apart,
Charlene was very afraid when the stalking incident occurred.
David was thrust into a loving son's worst nightmare.
We're pretty paranoid that there was somebody following her around.
She wouldn't just leave her kids and not come back.
It's what we would call a classic whodunit.
I was coming to the theory that it pretty much had to be him.
Sometimes people keep their darkest secrets hidden in plain sight. To the outside world, David Hummert lived the typical childhood of a New Cumberland, Pennsylvania boy.
I was the oldest of three. We did a lot of things as a family. We'd go to church every Sunday. And we did the normal family trips, and there were good, happy times.
It was all thanks to David's mother, Charlene, and her devotion to providing a good life for her children.
My mother definitely made sure that we experienced as much good stuff as kids as we could.
Char's kids were everything to her. Anytime you asked about the kids, she knew every little detail about their lives, and she always said it with a smile on her face, no matter what it was.
There was a few times where she got a second job to come up with money to make sure that the kids had actually more than we needed.
David's father, Brian, worked as an IT professional and adored his wife. The Hummerts seemed like an ideal family. But behind closed doors, it was a different story.
My first memory is actually being hit by my dad. That's the first thing I remember, probably when I was 5, 6 years old. Anytime anything upset him, he'd get a belt and smack you with it. He had a very short fuse.
Brian was always hovering near them, and he was very intimidating.
As David grew older, the physical abuse became more severe and more frequent. And one day in 2001, Brian hit a new low.
I believe I was 16 at the time. I normally would ride my bicycle home from school, but the chain had popped off, so my father had come to pick me up. We put the bike in the back, came home, and he was unloading the bike out of the back. The pedal caught the rear seat and put maybe a 1-inch rip in it. I went to go help him lift the bike out of it so it could get uncaught from the seat. He forced the bike back with pretty much as much force as he could, and the tire hit me in the face. Broke my nose, and I kind of thought it was an accident for a second, and then he started yelling and screaming at me that it was my fault that I trashed his interior and I was going to pay for it.
A bewildered David tried to stick up for himself, and for the first time, he fought back against his father.
I just jumped on him and pretty much pummeled him and choked him and threw him to the ground and beat on him for a little bit. And then he's threatening to call the cops for me assaulting him. I was like, call the cops and we'll see who they arrest.
When Charlene got home and found out what had happened, she kicked her husband out of the house and filed a restraining order against him. For 6 peaceful months, David and his family moved forward, while Brian went to live with his parents and sought help with anger management.
Honestly, we were happy. The whole family seemed to get more calm and better and be able to actually live together without yelling and screaming every day. It was pretty nice.
But soon, Brian came crawling back, promising a permanent change. And Charlene let her husband come home.
My mother talked to people from the church and her family and kind of believed, you got married, you stayed married, you worked through your problems. And, that was her belief. She didn't want to be a broken household and, father here, mother there.
David had mixed feelings about his father's return.
I wanted to believe it, but I think I knew that it was going to go back to the same way it was.
But soon, a new cloud of fear would settle over the Hummert family.
If it was meant to terrorize, mission accomplished.
And it would come from outside their home.
It was horrible. I think we lost a lot of nights of sleep.
Felt like I was protecting the entire rest of the family. It was a scary situation.
In early 2001, 17-year-old David Hummert was doing his best to keep peace within his family.
The relationship was still stressed, but I was trying to be there to help with my siblings.
It seemed like there was tension more between him and his father than anyone else in the family.
But that spring, David learned the family's biggest threat wasn't coming from inside the home.
My mother had called me one night and she's like, there's something going on you should know about. I haven't told your brother and sister yet. There's a guy following me around and he has photographs of her. She had taken like glamour shots from my father for a Christmas present. He had somehow gotten a hold of prints of them and was stalking her and had left letters at the house and on my father's car and on her car.
The stalker claimed he was following Charlene while she ran errands during the day, and he wrote, "The time is now right for payback." Terrified for their safety, Charlene and Brian called the police.
The one letter was very brief. It was directed towards Brian, and it basically said, "Your wife is a slut. The proof will be coming shortly." And then a short time after that was when the second letter was received, and that had the ripped up photographs of Charlene.
Charlene was very afraid when the stalking incident occurred. It had greatly shaken her up. If it was meant to cause fear, if it was meant to control, if it was meant to terrorize, mission accomplished.
But in the face of these fears, David's father had the opportunity to be the good guy, fighting for his family instead of against them.
The stress of the situation definitely took the focus off of the issues between my father and the rest of the family and focused it towards this guy that was out there everybody was paranoid about and wanted to catch. It united us against a common enemy.
After a few months, the letters stopped coming as abruptly as they started, and while the family was relieved, they still lived with an undercurrent of fear. In the summer of 2003, it seemed the stress had caught up with David's father. He suffered a severe heart attack that nearly killed him.
Came to see him, and he was very apologetic and said, "I'm sorry, I know I haven't been a good father, I want to fix things, I want to be better." We couldn't deal with the stress of being angry all the time. He's like, being angry all the time is killing me and I'm gonna stop it. He was going to counseling and he was on medication and he seemed like a good guy, seemed like a totally changed person. And actually started believing that he was gonna change and was pretty happy about it.
But as Brian's health returned, so too did his violent temper.
8 to 12 weeks after he'd had the heart attack, he asked me to help him move some furniture out of the workshop he had in the basement upstairs, and he'd gotten a splinter in his hand, and he dropped the bench. So I asked him if he was all right, and he turns around, curses at me, and then picks the end of the bench up and just shoves it into my chest. And then I left. I was like, I couldn't deal with it.
David had reached his snapping point. He broke the news to his mother that he would not be coming back home, ever.
She had told me, "This isn't your fault, it's his fault." She's like, "I want to be done with it. I'm tired of being stressed every day." She just flat out said she wanted to leave him.
But Charlene wanted to wait until the school year was over before telling Brian she was done.
Me and my mother started looking at properties, trying to find like a 2 to 3 to 4 bedroom house that me, her, and my brother and sister could move into. And pretty much the plan was to move as much stuff as possible, as quickly as possible before he realized it, and then she was gonna file divorce papers.
David hoped there would soon be some permanent peace in their lives.
She was finding properties, I was finding properties. We had actually somewhat settled on a place, and we're finalizing if we were gonna put an offer in.
But the future plans David and his mother were so desperate to make a reality would never see the light of day.
It's what we would call a classic whodunit.
It was a complete mystery. We just knew that there was foul play.
When I couldn't get a hold of her, I was starting to get pretty worried. She pretty much vanished into thin air.
The night of March 19th, 2004, started out as any other Friday night for David Hummert.
Sometime around 4 or 5 o'clock, ended up going out with my friends. Stayed out till probably about 4 o'clock in the morning on the 20th.
When David got home, he was stunned to find his father still awake in his study.
It was very unusual to see him up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he's sitting in normal clothes, not in pajamas or anything. He was just sitting there. He seemed just out of it.
David asked what was wrong, and Brian admitted that he and Charlene had had a blowout fight and that a friend had picked her up.
It was very odd for my mother to just up and leave and not call me or not tell me, but I figured, well, she's finally pissed off enough, she's actually left.
But the next morning, when David awoke, he noticed immediately that his mother's car was no longer in the driveway.
I asked my dad, he said that her truck was gone when he woke up, so she must have come in the middle of the night and got it, and he was just trying to let her blow off steam. So I placed probably 5-10 calls to my mother's cell phone, just trying to get a hold of her, see what was going on.
David's calls to his mother's cell phone went unanswered.
My dad, he said he went driving around looking for her. Couldn't find her car anywhere. It wasn't at any of the neighbors' houses or family members or anything. I was pretty concerned that maybe she was upset and got in a car accident or something had happened that we couldn't get hold of her.
David wanted to call the police, but Brian wasn't ready.
He's pretty matter-of-fact about it. He's like, oh, well, she has to be missing 24 hours.
My father, he had been to Brian's house, and Brian didn't seem upset. My father was very upset by that. This was his younger sister.
As day turned to night and Sunday morning approached, David's concern turned to panic. By now, Charlene had been missing for nearly 2 days. It was time to call the police.
On March 21st, 2004, I received a missing persons report. That officer spoke to Brian Hummert, who told the officer that he had not seen his wife since Friday night, the 19th. So the officer began a search for Charlene and the white Land Rover that she may be in. And a short time later, the officer discovered the Land Rover in the parking lot of a local food store.
Later that evening, David received a disturbing call from his father.
Yeah, he's like, you come home, I need to talk to you. I'm like, why? He's like, just, you need to come home, I'm not gonna tell you over the phone. I don't think I dropped below 100 miles an hour the whole way home. My brother and sister were there in the living room. I kind of knew that something bad happened. And he's like, they found your mom in her truck, she's dead. He's like, they don't know what happened. And at the time, I'm thinking it's like a car accident. They found her in the truck. The officer that was there was like, well, would you be able to come in for an interview sometime this week? We know it's going to be hard. And I'm like, an interview? Like what? And they're like, well, there's suspicious circumstances.
As the family mourned, police began taking a closer look at the details of Charlene's death.
At the autopsy, it was confirmed that Charlene strangled with a ligature. Now, ligature being something other than your hands. It's going to be a rope or a cable or something like that. And this was not an accidental or a natural death. Because of the suspicious nature, now we have a homicide investigation. We wanted to get a little bit more background from the family, as well as what else was going on in her life at that time.
I couldn't think who would possibly want to do this to my mother. Yeah, she helped everybody she knew. She was well-liked in the community. Really, the only thing I could think was this stalker.
Investigators immediately began taking another look at the threatening letters Charlene had received 3 years earlier. And when Brian confirmed his son's suspicions, police had their first lead.
Brian brought up this stalking incident and that if Charlene met an untimely death, it could be the work of this stalker.
Leaving no stone unturned, detectives gathered DNA samples from David and his family. They searched the Hummert home for any clues about what had happened to Charlene. They also continued their probing interviews. And that's when David noticed a disturbing trend.
As the time went on with the interviews, it seemed to be more and more pointing towards my father. The questions they were asking, a lot of background on financials and fighting in the household and issues that could lead up to the motive, and it definitely seemed to be leading more and more and more towards him. I kind of tried to push it down and be as impartial as I could.
David clung to the possibility that a stranger had killed his mother, while his father began feeling the pressure of the investigation.
And he's like, they're trying to frame me. They always put it on the husband. Like, you should be careful. They're gonna try and implicate you in it.
But a new development was about to send everything into a forensic whirlwind.
It was one of those come on moments.
My initial reaction when I saw this letter was, we got him.
In April of 2004, as the investigation into his mother's murder picked up steam, David Hummert was distraught as he realized police seemed to be zeroing in on his father.
The police searched several times throughout the investigation. And they were asking me a lot of questions about my father and arguments between my father and my mother.
But a strange new development was about to muddy the waters.
I received a letter at the police station. It was addressed to me. And basically this letter said, I killed Charlene Hummert, not Brian. The letters indicate that this person has killed before. This person's a serial killer. And the next day, the local newspaper received a letter that basically said the same thing. I killed Charlene Hummert, not Brian, but this one went into a little more detail, that only the actual murderer would know that he killed Charlene, brought her back to the house, drug her through the kitchen, then put her in her car.
And the author went on to taunt police, writing, "Cops have no idea how easy it is to try to pin husband."
For a serial killer to claim, I did it, not somebody else, that's almost unheard of. And it began to have some shades of the stalker letters. Because it was a handwritten letter, I was very hopeful that we were going to be able to match up the handwriting. So my initial reaction when I saw this letter was, we got him.
Police immediately sent the letters off for analysis, and that's when they discovered some undeniable similarities.
The author of the serial killer letters had the same linguistic tendencies, the same demographic, same background as the author of the stalker letters.
Armed with these details, police could now prove that the person who had stalked Charlene 3 years earlier was the very same person who had written letters confessing to her murder. Now the question was, who was he?
We knew it had to have been somebody who had to be close enough to Charlene to be able to get that close to her physically. There were different abrasions on her body. That meant she was already killed as she's being dragged through that driveway and loaded into the rear of her vehicle. So the killing had to have happened inside the house. It absolutely leads to only one conclusion, that Charlene Hummert was murdered in her house by Brian Hummert.
Police immediately issued search warrants for Brian's home and work computers. And what they found was shocking.
We were able to find those 2001 stalker letters and actually the photographs that were used in those incidents on Brian Hummert's computer. We also found hard copies of those documents and pictures in the house.
Police also found a makeshift dog leash, the very same type of cable used to strangle Charlene.
The dog cable was found in the computer room, and when the investigators saw it, they went, "Oh my God, that's it."
Brian Hummert was arrested for first-degree murder in November of 2004. For David and his family, the news cut like a knife.
There's relief, anger, sadness. I mean, even as much as I honestly hated the guy, I still didn't want to believe that my father could kill my mother.
It was extremely hard to realize that someone you had in your family did this. The more we found out, I believe, the harder it was on our family.
In May 2012, Brian Hummert was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Honestly, it was kind of vindicating, just getting the closure in my mind, saying it's finally done and I can move on with my life.
Today, David still struggles to come to terms with his mother's murder and his father's arrest. And the ordeal has taken its toll on his family.
I haven't spoken to either of my brother or sister since 2004. They've supported my father throughout the whole thing.
But through it all, David had the unwavering support of his mother's side of the family.
Our family has taken David in as a brother and a son because he doesn't have anyone else.
And while the pain of his mother's death is ever present, David strives to build a life he knows Charlene would be proud of.
I've tried to work hard and be good to other people, but there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about my mom. I miss being able to talk to her and get advice, and just, like, she always knew the right thing to do.
Brent Doonan hired high-flying Mark Barton at his firm. He thought he'd found the perfect man for the job.
He had a lot of trading experience. He was happy with life, had plenty of money.
He was known as the Rocket. When he scored, he would explode in celebration.
But the stock market isn't for the faint of heart.
A minute could be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And soon he'd discover the rocket was full of hot air.
The rocket was about to explode.
The whole city was just frightened to death.
Atlanta was locked down.
He said, today is going to be visual.
Sometimes people keep their darkest secrets hidden in plain sight. In the winter of 1997, risk-taking investors were dying to catch the dot-com wave, and no one wanted in on the action more than 23-year-old Brent Doonan.
I was with one of the big six accounting firms in Chicago right out of college. No complaints with that, but I looked at staying with corporate America or stepping out to carve out my own piece of the American pie.
So in February of 1998, Brent and a friend took a chance and launched a day trading firm in the young, vibrant city of Atlanta. And they knew it was sink or swim.
Day trading was a high-risk game. You could be destitute or deliriously wealthy in a single day.
We were young, ambitious, working 70 hours a week. It was a big risk to go in there and start from the ground up.
Brent knew he needed traders, good traders, with moxie and money. And one day, the perfect candidate came knocking.
A guy named Mark Barton came in and met with me in March of '98. He was a chemist by trade, but he had a lot of trading experience. Called himself a whale, meaning he traded blocks of 3,000 shares at a time, and that he didn't need any training. He was pretty much ready to go.
Brent couldn't help but be impressed by Mark. He was a big, happy-go-lucky, jovial, smart guy.
He knew how to trade, had plenty of money. He wanted to learn how to use our system, and he wanted to get going. Once he started, he was very, very aggressive. The guys in the office nicknamed him the Rocket because he was always just shooting to go to the sky.
One day he netted $106,000 in a single day of trading.
Mark seemed to be just what Alltech needed. He also seemed to be a consummate family man. Once the whistle blew, Mark Barton never socialized.
We would ask Mark, do you want to go to happy hour with us? And his response was typically, I either have church to go to, I've got Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts with my son. He always found an excuse, and it was typically motivated around his family.
So Brent thought it was especially strange when he overheard the guarded phone calls between Mark and his wife.
It was the same every day. He would call up, the phone would ring forever. Finally, an answering machine would come on, and he would say, it's okay, honey, it's me, it's Mark, you can pick up the phone.
It almost seemed like Mark was regulating his wife's phone calls.
We all have our own quirks. You know, this guy's a great guy. He's handling his gains and losses. He comes in every day with a positive attitude. So he makes his wife wait until she knows that it's him to pick up the phone. I don't really feel as a business owner that I should get into a client's personal life to that level.
Brent knew what his priority was. Mark's performance at Alltech, which was top-notch.
He wasn't going to take no. He was going to keep going. He was going to shoot for the top, hence the name Rocket.
But as time went on, the rocket began to run out of fuel.
He started taking bigger and bigger gambles.
I immediately knew something was terribly wrong.
There was blood all over. It was a matter of life or death.
In early 1999, Brent Doonan was flying high, and so was his day trading firm, Alltech. Business was booming.
It was very stressful, obviously, but it was also very rewarding to watch a business go from zero to a pretty steep climb as you're adding traders right and left.
And one of the biggest doses of adrenaline was Brent's star trader, Mark the Rocket Barton, an ex-chemist with a larger-than-life personality.
Barton tended to take big risks, and when they paid off big, he would explode in celebration, like a launching rocket.
But even an optimistic go-getter has some bad days.
His trading had gotten a little bit out of control, and it's one of those things where you get behind a little bit and you try extra hard to make that up, and that's what happened to him.
But Mark never made it back up. And before long, he had dipped into company reserves to the tune of $11,000, forcing Brent to cut him off.
I basically told him that he was going to have to make up that difference for us, and that he would have to start with at least another $50,000 if he wanted to continue to trade with us.
So Mark left Alltech, but a few weeks later, he came back to make good on his debt.
It wasn't long, given his personality, that he gave us the $11,000 back and funded his account with another $50,000 to get started trading again.
Brent didn't know where Mark got the funds, but he welcomed his return. Unfortunately, the rocket was still off course. And within 8 weeks, Mark owed Alltech again, this time more than $30,000.
Brent again asked Mark to leave Alltech. Barton said he understood, and maybe it was time for him to get back to work at being a chemist.
There were no hard feelings. There was a handshake and a vow that he would be back someday to repay the debt.
But 2 months went by with no word from Mark and no payment. Then on July 29th, 1999, while Brent was in the conference room holding a meeting, the rocket suddenly appeared.
Mark Barton came through the main doors at Alltech, a little bit sweaty, and he began waving to get Brent's attention.
Mark said, "Come here, come here. You're really going to love this." Smile on his face. I thought he was there to repay the $30,000 that he was in debt to us. I followed him out of the conference room and into my office, where my partner and my secretary were both seated. When he turned around, that happy, jovial look on his face was gone. It was just this straight-faced with these eyes that just seemed to look right through me. And he said simply, "Today is going to be visual."
At that point, Mark crossed his arms like some B-movie bandito, and he pulls out 2 handguns.
At first, Brent thought Mark was pranking him.
I thought maybe they were cap guns or something, and then I saw the flash muzzle.
And he fires point blank at Brent, looking him in the eye the whole time.
The first one hit me in the chest, the second one in the arm. I laid there for a couple seconds and was in intense pain. I started to see a pool of blood surround me, and I saw 2 gold shell casings right there. At that point, I just said to myself, "Oh my God, I just got shot."
And Barton was just getting started. While Brent lay there in agony, Mark shot Brent's partner and assistant, then continued onto the floor.
Mark began shooting methodically, yelling at one point, "I hope this doesn't ruin your trading day."
There was blood all over. I could hear him out there shooting people over and over and over, the screaming, the yelling, the commotion. I thought, do I lay there and pretend like I'm dead? Do Do I get up and try to make a run for it? There was a high probability that if I laid there and played dead, that he would come back and finish me off. So I stood up, and at that point I realized that he was in my office doorway with his back towards me, shooting out onto the office trading floor. I decided very quickly that I didn't have a choice, that if he turned around, I would be dead. My only option was to go for it. He had the gun aimed right at the woman's head, and I hit him as hard as I possibly could. And he pulled the trigger. It missed her. I made a run for it into the hallway, but he was able to shoot me in the back, in my left arm, and one that was just a grazer.
By now, Brent had been shot 5 times.
By the time I got into the hallway and started to make a run for it, it was a very surreal experience. The walls seemed to be closing in. I was trying to run as fast as I could, but it seemed like I was just not making headway, almost like when you're running in a dream. I was having a hard time standing, so I was using the walls to keep my balance. The lights were very bright. I couldn't hear a thing. I was just on a mission, an instinct of survival. Just get out of there. I didn't know what was going on behind me, if he was still in the office, if he was still in the building.
Just ahead was a service elevator in the hallway.
Brent knew the elevator was his one shot at escape.
I just started pushing the up button as fast as I could, just pushing. And a few seconds went by. I noticed one of our other traders, and right behind her, I saw him lift his gun and shoot her right there, point blank. At that point, the service elevator doors open. I jumped in there, started frantically pushing buttons.
Brent prayed for the doors to close.
I was just trying to go somewhere, anywhere.
But his attacker had other plans.
Barton appeared outside the elevator.
He raised his gun at me.
The monster was inches away.
On July 29th of 1999, young executive Brent Doonan boarded an elevator, but he wasn't headed to a meeting. He was trying to escape Mark Barton's deadly massacre after being shot 5 times.
I jumped in there, started frantically pushing buttons, and as the door started to close, it was Barton. He raised his gun at me, and just before he pulled the trigger, the elevator doors closed. I crouched down on all fours, just trying to keep some energy left to where when the doors open, I had a fighting chance. Eventually, they opened in what felt like an eternity. I had only traveled up 1 floor to the 3rd floor. I saw an office right next to the elevator.
The tenants on the 3rd floor had no idea of the carnage going on below them.
I walked in there and I said, "Somebody please help me. I've been shot." And the response was, "Is this a joke?" I instructed them to lock the door and close the blinds and to get me out of the entryway, that it was likely that the shooter was still after me and that if he found me, we were all going to die.
Brent was dead serious and fading fast.
And that's when I fell to the ground.
While some of the office workers tended to Brent's wounds, others called 911, and the dispatcher assured them that help was on the way.
Help was on the way, but what no one knew was that it was being funneled somewhere else.
As horrifying as the events were at Alltech, the slaughter hadn't started there. Barton had actually begun his killing across Piedmont Avenue at Momentum Securities, where he had also lost money. The dispatchers had confused Alltech with Momentum Securities.
A terrible waiting game began for Brent as EMTs frantically tried to figure out where to go. Brent lay there for almost an hour, fearing Mark Barton could still rush in to finish him off.
The door burst open, and in came a paramedic and a man behind him. He said, "If you keep your eyes open and on me, you will live today."
When I first heard about it, I couldn't believe that my son had been shot. There are no words that can describe what a mother feels like to know that their child was hurting so bad. There's just no words.
As he was rushed to the hospital, Brent focused on the man's face, while police turned their sights on finding Mark Barton, whose body count was rising.
Between Alltech and Momentum, Mark Barton had shot 22 people. 9 of them died.
Worse, in the confusion of 2 shooting locations, the murderer slipped away.
Mark Barton had escaped the Alltech offices and walked across the parking lot and gotten into his minivan, disappeared into the streets of Atlanta. One of the largest manhunts in Georgia history locked down Atlanta and much of the state.
And that's when police went to Mark Barton's home and found another ghastly tableau.
They found the bludgeoned bodies of his wife and his 2 children, killed by a hammer in their beds.
As the manhunt intensified, Brent Doonan lay in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. The city of Atlanta was on high alert, with residents and officers alike terrified of who Mark Barton would target next.
The city was scared to death.
He was an explosive psychopath.
They didn't know how much ammunition he had. It was like a nightmare.
In July of 1999, 4 horrifying hours passed after Atlanta police had locked down the state and launched a fierce manhunt for heavily armed killer Mark Barton.
The whole city was just frightened to death. They didn't know how much ammunition he had. The news was on all the TVs in Atlanta. It was a horrible, horrible nightmare.
Finally, police cornered Barton at a gas station north of town and ordered him out of his van. Seconds later, a shot rang out.
Rather than be arrested, Mark Barton shot himself in the head.
Mark Barton died instantly. The nightmare was finally over.
I was so relieved when I found out that Mark killed himself. And we didn't have to worry whether he was going to pop up around the corner somewhere. I felt a huge relief that he was gone.
But Mark's suicide left behind many unanswered questions and several victims, including Brent Doonan, fighting for their lives.
He'd lost most of his body's blood supply, and most of his internal organs had been damaged.
It was devastating. When we arrived at the hospital, he was hooked up to all kinds of tubes. They told us that they didn't think that he would make it through the night.
Against all odds, Brent made it to the next morning, and that's when his family told him that Mark was dead.
I doubted whether they were telling me the truth or just trying to get me to keep fighting, so I asked one family member after another until I was satisfied that he was no longer after me.
And as more information about who Mark Barton really was slowly came out, Brent and everyone else realized Mark's happy-go-lucky smile was hiding sinister secrets.
He was just not the person that I thought he was.
Just 6 years earlier, Mark had secretly taken out a life insurance policy on his first wife.
Not much later, his wife and her mother were found brutally bludgeoned to death in a camper trailer. Barton was the main suspect, but he was never arrested.
Forensics couldn't make a conclusive link, and Barton remained free and completely unapologetic. He cashed in on the policy and invested in the stock market.
The $150,000 that he had used in day trading was the result of insurance funds from the passing away of his first wife.
But Mark racked up more debt than income and ended up owing thousands, not just to Alltech, but also to Momentum Securities.
Mark Barton was caught in a downward spiral. Things had gotten out of his control. That might have something to do with his explosion of frustration at the end. He was lashing out at the world. Unfortunately, we'll never know exactly what was on Mark Barton's mind.
Mark Barton's motives died with him. Today, Brent lives in Kansas with his beloved family after years of emotional and physical turmoil.
Brent suffered from panic attacks. He went through PTSD with horrible nightmares, reliving those moments that he went through with Mark chasing him. Nobody will ever know the trauma that he felt inside of his body.
After a brief try at returning to Alltech, Brent concluded that investment banking was not the place for him anymore and sold his share of the business.
It was very difficult to be back in there. You're physically scarred, emotionally scarred forever. You never go back to life as usual.
But Brent has found a new purpose in life, his 9-year-old son.
He's the center of my universe and has really, really helped me get through not only this, but gives me a reason to be here.
It's just amazing that he could go through all of this and survive and be a happy young man and have a bright outlook on life.
I would consider this not a tragedy, but in the end, this is a story of living.
It starts with a silence that shouldn't exist. A front door unlocked. A car still warm in the driveway. And a house in suburban California breathing like nothing is wrong, even as a life inside it has already vanished. March 2003. The kind of California morning that looks harmless on camera. Blue sky. Clean sidewalks. Lawns trimmed with obsessive care. This is the sort of neighborhood where nothing bad is supposed to happen, where crime belongs on television screens, not on your street. And yet, by the time the sun clears the rooftops, the word missing is already echoing through police radios, through whispered phone calls, through the stunned silence of neighbors standing barefoot on their porches. She was supposed to be home by midnight. She never made it. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No blood. No struggle, just absence. Detectives step inside the house and feel it immediately, that wrongness seasoned investigators learn to recognize. A purse on the kitchen counter, keys still hanging by the door, a half-finished cup of coffee cold in the sink. Life interrupted mid-breath. The kind of scene that doesn't scream violence, but whispers it over and over until it gets inside your head. This isn't a runaway. This isn't an accident. This is a cold case being born in real time. By noon, the street is sealed off. Patrol cars idle at the curb. Uniforms knock on doors with polite urgency, asking the same questions again and again. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Anyone strange? Any noise in the night? Most answers are the same. No. No. Nothing. This neighborhood sleeps early. Curtains drawn. Lights out. Silence everywhere. But silence is not innocence. The victim is known here. Friendly. Predictable. The kind of person neighbors describe with the same words. Quiet, polite routine. Every morning at the same time. Every evening the same return. A life so consistent that when it breaks, the fracture is deafening. Her disappearance doesn't just unsettle investigators. It rattles the entire community. Because if she can vanish without a trace, then anyone can. The first 48 hours are frantic. Search teams. Flyers. Helicopters cutting circles into the sky. Volunteers comb nearby fields, drainage canals, wooded edges where the suburbs begin to fray. Police chase down every lead, every tip, every half-remembered shadow. A white van. A strange sound. A man walking a dog too late at night. Everything matters. Everything is logged. Everything goes nowhere. By day 3, the language changes. Not officially. Not yet. But detectives stop saying when she comes home. They start saying if. Her phone records show nothing unusual. No final call. No frantic message. Credit cards untouched. Bank accounts frozen in time. It's as if she stepped out of her life and evaporated. And the longer that absence stretches, the heavier it becomes. The press arrives. Cameras line the street. Headlines harden. Mysterious disappearance. Community on edge. No suspects. Inside the house, crime scene texts go back again and again, chasing details they might have missed. Fibers. Smudges. Anything microscopic that might whisper a name. They bag evidence with the care of people who know this case is already slipping through their fingers. Every hour that passes is an hour the truth gets further away. Neighbors begin to talk. Not to police. To each other. Whispers over fences. Low voices at the mailbox. Someone mentions a noise that might have been a door. Another remembers headlights at an odd hour. Small fragments of memory bending under the weight of fear. Because now, every ordinary detail feels sinister. Every shadow feels watched. Detectives map the area like a chessboard. Who lives where? Who is home? Who wasn't? They draw lines between houses, between routines, between sight lines. And slowly, uncomfortably, a pattern starts to emerge, not of movement, but of proximity. The kind of proximity that doesn't show up in databases. The kind you feel in your gut before you can explain it. The investigation turns inward. Friends, coworkers, acquaintances, anyone who knew her schedule, anyone who knew when she'd be alone. Interviews stretch late into the night. Alibis are checked, rechecked, dismantled, rebuilt. Some hold, some don't, but none break open the case. No confession, no arrest. Just a widening circle of suspicion that touches everyone and satisfies no one. Days turn into weeks. Search efforts slow. Flyers fade in the sun. Media attention drifts to fresher horrors. And without the oxygen of urgency, the case begins to cool. Detectives hate that word, cold, but they feel it settling in. Leads dry up. Tips become vague. The file grows thicker even as the truth gets thinner. Inside the department, frustration simmers. Because this case shouldn't be this hard. No forced entry means she knew her abductor, or trusted them, or never saw them coming. No witnesses means it happened quietly, efficiently, with confidence. This wasn't random. This was personal. Planned. Close. Too close. Months later, a piece of evidence resurfaces from the bottom of the box. Something overlooked. Something that didn't seem important at the time. A detail, so ordinary it blended into the background. Detectives look at it again, and this time, it feels different. Heavier. Charged. The radius tightens. Attention shifts to the houses nearby. The ones that were never searched because there was no reason to. The ones that seemed safe by default. Background checks begin. Quiet ones. Unofficial. Names run through systems late at night when no one is watching. Most come back clean. Normal lives. Normal routines. Normal faces. Then one doesn't. It's small at first. A discrepancy. A timeline that doesn't line up perfectly. Nothing that would hold up in court. Nothing that would make headlines. But enough to make a detective pause. Enough to pull a file. Enough to ask a few more questions that weren't asked before. The address is shockingly close. Next door. Not a stranger from the highway. Not a drifter. Not a monster hiding in the dark. Someone who waved hello. Someone who borrowed tools. Someone who knew the rhythm of the street, the timing of the lights, the exact moment when no one would be watching. The realization hits like a punch to the chest. If this is true, then the danger was never outside the neighborhood. It was inside it the entire time. Breathing the same air, standing on the same sidewalk, watching from a window no one thought to look at. But suspicion is not proof. And proof is everything. As detectives lean in, the case pushes back. Records are incomplete. Memories have faded. Evidence has aged poorly. What could have been decisive years ago now feels fragile, compromised by time. And the suspect, if that's what he is, knows it.
Calm.
Cooperative. Almost offended by the attention. A man who understands that without hard evidence, the past is just a story. The community senses the shift. Rumors spread faster than facts ever did. Fear mutates into paranoia. Trust erodes. Neighbors look at neighbors differently now, measuring smiles, reinterpreting kindness. Because once you accept that the truth might be this close, you can't unsee it. The case is no longer just about a missing woman. It's about the lie everyone lived in. Years pass. The file never closes. It just sleeps. A cold case in every sense of the word. Unresolved, heavy, waiting. Detectives retire. New ones inherit the box, the photos, the unanswered questions. Each of them feels the same pull, the same frustration, the same quiet certainty that the answer is there, hiding in plain sight, just beyond reach. And somewhere on that street, life goes on. Lawns are mowed. Houses are sold. New families move in, unaware of what happened there, unaware of how close the darkness once was. Or maybe still is. Because the most terrifying thing about this case isn't that the killer was never caught. It's the possibility that they were never gone. Time doesn't heal this kind of wound. It just teaches people how to live around it. By the second year, the street no longer looks like a crime scene, but the air still remembers. New coats of paint cover old walls. Curtains change. Cars come and go. Yet something remains embedded beneath the normalcy, a residue of fear that never fully evaporates. Detectives know this phase well, when a case stops being urgent and starts being inconvenient. When budgets tighten. When supervisors ask quiet questions about priorities. When the word cold stops being a metaphor and becomes a classification. The file sits on a shelf, thick and heavy, its edges softened by handling. Inside are hundreds of photographs, transcripts, diagrams of the house, maps of the neighborhood. Every page represents an attempt to impose order on chaos. Every page fails. One detective refuses to let it go. He wasn't there on day one. He didn't walk into the house when the coffee was still warm or see the street before it learned how to pretend. He inherits the case years later, long after the headlines have faded, long after the community has trained itself not to talk about what happened. Fresh eyes, they call it. As if vision alone could resurrect the dead. He reads everything. He notices the silences more than the statements. The things people didn't say. The questions that were never asked because no one thought to ask them at the time. Early investigations are fast, messy, emotional. This one was no different. Everyone assumed the threat came from outside. From somewhere else. From some faceless danger that could be safely blamed and conveniently distant. But distance is comforting. Proximity is terrifying. He redraws the map. Not the official one, with neat circles and search grids, but a living map. Routines. Lines of sight. Who could see what and when, which windows faced which doors, who left for work early, who stayed home, who had reasons to notice, and reasons not to. And when he places the victim at the center of it all, one truth becomes unavoidable. She was surrounded. Neighbors were interviewed early on, but casually. Courtesy checks. Polite questions. Names written down and never revisited. No warrants. No deep dives. No pressure. They were safe by assumption, cleared by geography alone. The detective doesn't believe in assumptions. He rereads a witness statement from the first week. A neighbor mentioning a noise. Not loud, not alarming, just out of place. A door closing, maybe. Or opening. At the time, it went nowhere. Now, it bothers him. Because the timing lines up too well. Because the direction points inward, not out. He pulls property records.
Backgrounds.
Employment histories. Patterns that would have meant nothing back then. A job with flexible hours. A history of minor offenses, dismissed as irrelevant. Nothing violent. Nothing that screams danger. Just enough to suggest familiarity with rules and how to bend them. The address keeps coming back. Next door. The man who lived there had been cooperative,
calm,
almost eager to help. He volunteered information. He filled silences. Investigators at the time appreciated that. Helpful neighbors are a relief in the early chaos of a missing person case. No one wants resistance when they're racing the clock. Years later, that eagerness looks different. The detective notices how often the man inserted himself into conversations, how frequently he referenced details no one had asked about, how his timeline fit perfectly, almost too perfectly, into the gaps left by others. Alibis built with care tend to look like architecture, not memory. But architecture collapses under weight. Technology becomes the turning point, not because it answers questions, but because it asks new ones. Digital forensics, primitive in 2003, now offers possibilities that didn't exist back then. Old cell phone records are revisited, what little remains of them. Ping data, call durations, gaps where activity should be. It's incomplete, frustrating, riddled with limitations. But even absence can speak. On the night she vanished, his phone goes dark. Not unusual by itself. People turn off phones all the time. Batteries die. Coverage drops. But when placed alongside the timeline, the silence feels deliberate, calculated, a choice. The detective requests permission to re-interview. Years have a way of softening resistance. The man is older now, slower, still polite, still calm. He agrees without hesitation, invites them in, offers water, sits comfortably in his own living room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life uninterrupted. Photographs, souvenirs, evidence of time passing normally. They talk. At first, it's nothing. Familiar questions, familiar answers. But then the detective shifts subtly. He introduces details that weren't public. Small inconsistencies. The man corrects him. Too quickly. Too confidently. He knows things he shouldn't. Or knows them in a way that suggests rehearsal. The room tightens. Investigators exchange glances. Not enough to accuse. Enough to notice. The interview ends without fireworks. Without confrontation. Without confession. But when they leave, the air feels different. Charged. As if something unseen has been disturbed. They go back to the house. Not the victim's. His. With new eyes. They photograph. Measure. Reconstruct. They trace the shared fence line. The narrow gap between properties. The blind spots created by landscaping, by garages, by the lazy assumptions of suburban design. From certain angles, the victim's back door is completely invisible to the street. To everyone except someone standing exactly where he would have been. The theory forms quietly, cautiously. Access without force. Control without noise. Familiarity without suspicion. But theories don't hold up in court. They need something tangible. Something undeniable. And time has not been kind. Physical evidence degrades. Witness memories distort. People move away. Some die. The longer a case stays cold, the more the truth resists being pulled back into the light. Pressure builds inside the department. Resources are limited. Cold cases compete with living victims, active threats. Every hour spent chasing a ghost is an hour not spent saving someone who can still be saved. The detective feels it. The unspoken question. Is this worth it? He thinks of the house. The coffee cup. The silence. He doesn't stop. A break comes from an unexpected place. Not a confession. Not a miracle.
a mistake.
The suspect makes an offhand comment to someone he trusts years earlier, never imagining it would matter. A joke, maybe. A remark framed as speculation. It surfaces now through a chain of conversations, fragile but persistent. He said something about knowing when no one was watching. The detective leans in. They corroborate.
Carefully.
Quietly. They compare notes across years, across statements that never quite lined up. Patterns emerge, faint but consistent. Behavior that, viewed alone, is meaningless. Viewed together, it begins to suggest intent. Still, it's not enough. The community grows restless as whispers resurface. Old fear reawakens. Some residents demand answers. Others demand silence. Because reopening the case means reopening wounds. It means admitting that the monster wasn't chased away. It lived among them. It waved back. The suspect senses the shift. His demeanor changes. Not dramatically. Just enough. Less cooperative. More guarded. He hires a lawyer. Stops returning calls. His house becomes closed off, defensive. A fortress of normalcy. To the untrained eye, it looks like self-protection. To investigators, it looks like retreat. The detective feels the clock again. Not the one that measures urgency, but the one that measures opportunity. Evidence can still be found. It might still be there, hidden, forgotten, waiting. But every day that passes is another layer of dust, another excuse for doubt. He stands on the sidewalk between the two houses one evening, long after the street has gone quiet. The light is fading. The same angle. The same view. He imagines the moment everything changed. How fast it must have been. How quiet. How easily it blended into the background noise of suburban life. This wasn't chaos. It was precision. And precision leaves traces. The question is whether anyone will find them in time. Because once a case like this begins to warm, it doesn't just threaten the person who committed the crime. It threatens the illusion that kept everyone safe. And illusions don't give up without a fight. Cold cases don't come back to life all at once. They breathe first. A file moves from the archive to a desk. A name gets spoken aloud after years of being avoided. A quiet request is made for evidence no one expected to touch again. The resurrection is subtle, almost invisible, but to the person at the center of it, it feels like a change in air pressure. Something is moving. Something is wrong. The detective knows this phase well. The moment when a suspect realizes the past has not stayed buried. He starts with what remains. Evidence lockers are unforgiving places. Boxes stacked like coffins. Labels faded. Chain of custody forms yellowed with age. Every item inside represents a promise once made that this would matter someday, that someone would come back for it. He signs the paperwork and waits as the door opens with a dull, metallic complaint. Inside, the case exhales. There are fibers collected from the victim's home. Fingernail scrapings sealed in plastic. Swabs taken from surfaces no one thought would ever be important. Back then, technology couldn't do much with them. Today, it might. Or it might not. Cold cases survive on might. The samples go to the lab. Waiting begins again. While science works in silence, the detective works in daylight. He returns to the neighborhood, not as an investigator this time, but as a listener. He knocks on doors that have been knocked on before, but years change people. Time loosens tongues. Regret sharpens memory. He asks the same questions, but differently. Not what did you see? What did you ignore? Some neighbors are defensive. Others are relieved. They've carried unease like a low-grade fever for years, never fully sick, never fully well. One woman admits she stopped letting her children play outside after the disappearance. A man confesses he installed new locks and never said why. Fear reshaped this place quietly, house by house. Someone mentions something they never told police. It seemed stupid at the time. It seemed small. A sound in the early hours. Not a scream. Not a crash. Just movement where there shouldn't have been any. A figure between houses. Too close to the ground to be casual. Too deliberate to be accidental. At the time, they convinced themselves it was nothing. It's amazing how quickly the mind cooperates when the alternative is terror. The timeline tightens. The detective overlays this new account with old data. Weather reports. Moon phases. Streetlight coverage. Every detail narrows the window. What once spanned hours now compresses into minutes. The crime didn't unfold over time. It detonated in a brief, controlled moment. That kind of efficiency points to preparation. He turns back to the suspect. Records show he was home that night. No confirmed visitors. No witnesses placing him elsewhere. His alibi is absence. No one saw him doing anything, which is precisely the problem. In 2003, that was enough. In 2010, it begins to look like opportunity. The detective requests surveillance footage from a nearby intersection. It's a long shot. Most systems don't retain data that far back. But sometimes backups exist where no one thought to look. Old municipal archives. Forgotten tapes. Dusty hard drives stored without purpose. Most of it is unusable. But not all. There's a fragment. Grainy. Incomplete. A timestamp that might be off by minutes. A vehicle passes through the frame at an odd hour. The quality is poor, but the shape is familiar.
The make.
The model. Registered to an address uncomfortably close to the victim's home. It's not proof. It's pressure. The suspect is brought in again. This time, the tone is different. The questions are sharper. The room feels smaller. He senses it immediately. His posture changes. His voice tightens. He asks for clarification more often, buying time. His answers drift from rehearsed confidence to cautious minimalism. He's adapting. That, too, is telling. The detective introduces the idea of proximity. Not accusation. Just observation. How easy it would have been for someone nearby. How rare it is for a crime like this to occur without noise, without witnesses, without forced entry. He watches closely as the words land. There it is. A flicker. Gone almost instantly. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like calculation. The suspect responds with indignation, not shock. Offense, not confusion. He frames himself as the victim of harassment, of obsession. He threatens legal action. He demands the interview end. It does. But the damage is done. Outside the room, the detective exhales. He doesn't have enough to charge. He knows that. But he has enough to continue. And continuation is the enemy of anyone who believed time would protect them. The lab calls weeks later. The results are not definitive. They never are. But they're promising. A partial profile. Inconclusive on its own. Powerful when compared. The detective requests a sample. Voluntary at first. The suspect refuses. Now the game changes. A warrant is requested.
Carefully. Conservatively.
Every word weighed. Judges don't like cold cases built on intuition. They like facts. Corroboration. Logic that doesn't rely on gut feelings. The detective delivers what he has. Not certainty. Probability. The warrant is granted. The sample is collected. Days pass like weeks. The community feels it before it hears it. Police presence increases. Unmarked cars linger. People notice. Old conversations resurface. Fear becomes communal again, shared openly instead of swallowed privately. The idea that the truth might finally emerge is both comforting and terrifying. What if they're wrong? What if they're right? The lab result arrives without ceremony. An email. A report. Clinical language describing something deeply human. A match, but not a full one. A familial connection. Enough to suggest that the person they're looking at is not a random figure, but part of a genetic shadow cast across the evidence. It opens another door. The detective follows it. Family trees are built. Names cross-referenced. Relatives contacted under the guise of unrelated inquiries. It's slow, delicate work. One wrong move could collapse the entire structure. But slowly, the net tightens. The suspect notices. He grows erratic. Less composed. Neighbors report strange behavior. Late-night activity. Items being discarded. A sense of urgency that wasn't there before. People who once trusted him now avoid eye contact. Suspicion is contagious. The detective knows he's close. But closeness is dangerous. Cold cases have a way of slipping away at the last moment, sabotaged by technicalities, by doubt, by the sheer weight of time. He reviews everything again, hunting for weaknesses. Any crack the defense could exploit. Any assumption that needs shoring up. Because this isn't just about solving a case. It's about rewriting a history that is calcified around a lie. The truth, if it comes, will not land gently. It will rip through this neighborhood, through families, through years of misplaced trust. It will answer one question, and ignite 100 more. And as the detective prepares for what comes next, he understands something with terrifying clarity. If the killer really lived next door, then the crime didn't end the night she disappeared. It continued every single day afterward. Behind smiles, behind greetings, behind walls that were never meant to hide anything at all. The past doesn't stay quiet when it senses weakness. It presses forward. By the time the detective steps into the command room that morning, the case has shifted from memory to momentum. Whiteboards are crowded with names, timelines, arrows crossing and recrossing like scars. This is no longer a cold case in spirit. It's warm now, dangerous,
Alive.
the suspect's name sits at the center, circled in red. For years, he was just a neighbor. Now he is gravity. The problem is not belief. Everyone in the room believes it now. The problem is proof. The kind that survives cross-examination. The kind that doesn't blink under fluorescent lights in a courtroom. Circumstantial evidence can suggest.
Patterns can imply.
But juries demand something harder. Something final. The detective knows where the weaknesses are.
Time.
Every defense attorney loves time. Time erodes memory. Time contaminates evidence. Time creates doubt where certainty once lived. They will argue contamination, coincidence, confirmation bias. They will say investigators decided on a suspect and bent the facts to fit. They will say grief and fear infected the process. So the detective does the one thing cold cases demand.
He slows down.
He reconstructs the crime as if it happened yesterday. Every movement, every decision, every second. Not emotionally, but mechanically. This wasn't rage. This wasn't chaos. This was execution. And execution leaves logic behind, even when it tries to erase itself. The victim did not scream. The neighbors did not hear a struggle. The house showed no forced entry, which means the encounter began calmly. A knock she didn't fear. A voice she recognized. A face she trusted enough to open the door for. Next door. Investigators revisit the suspect's employment records. Something emerges that didn't stand out before. A history of access.
Tools.
Knowledge of restraint without injury. The ability to immobilize without leaving obvious marks. Not criminal, not illegal, just useful. Too useful. They examine his internet history from what little remains. Fragmentary. Incomplete, but suggestive. Searches related to surveillance. To blind spots. To cleanup methods phrased as curiosity, not intent. On their own, meaningless. Together, unsettling. Pressure builds. The suspect's attorney files motions. Complaints. Accusations of harassment. He frames the investigation as persecution, as a witch hunt fueled by desperation. He tells friends he's being targeted because police need closure. Some believe him. Some don't. The community fractures. People choose sides quietly. No shouting. No protests. Just distance. Invitations stop coming. Conversations end early. Trust collapses in polite silence. Because if this man is guilty, then everyone failed to see it. And if he's innocent, then the accusation itself is an act of violence. The detective feels the weight of it. He feels it when he drives past the house at night. When he imagines the crime unfolding in the dark gap between properties. When he stands at the shared fence and realizes how narrow the margin was between safety and disappearance. A break comes from an unlikely place. A former coworker. Years ago, the suspect made a comment at work. A strange one. Casual. Almost humorous. About how people assume danger comes from outside, never from right beside them. At the time, it earned a laugh. Now, it lands differently. The coworker never forgot it.
He didn't know why.
He just knew it felt wrong. The statement is documented. Another thread. The detective brings in a profiler. Not to identify the killer. That part feels redundant now, but to understand the behavior. The profiler listens, nods, asks few questions. Then says something that quiets the room. This isn't someone who panicked. This is someone who planned to live with it. That changes everything. Living with a crime like this requires compartmentalization,
Control.
the ability to maintain routine while carrying a secret that could destroy everything. It suggests not a momentary lapse, but a sustained psychological architecture built around concealment. The suspect fits it too well. Investigators apply for another warrant, this time for the house itself. Not a general search, a targeted one. Specific areas, crawl spaces, storage, places that were never examined because no one imagined they needed to be. The warrant is approved. The search is quiet. No sirens, no spectacle, just unmarked vehicles and careful steps. Neighbors watch from behind curtains, pretending not to see. The suspect is present, forced to observe as strangers walk through his life with gloves and cameras. They don't find what they're looking for. Not at first. Disappointment hangs heavy. Cold cases love false dawns. The kind that convince you the answer is inches away, only to vanish when you reach for it. But the detective doesn't stop. He asks for the attic,
The shed.
the narrow space beneath the stairs. Then someone calls out. A floorboard doesn't sound right. It's subtle, a hollow note where there shouldn't be one. Investigators pry carefully, methodically. Beneath it, a void. Inside the void, something wrapped. Preserved not by care, but by avoidance. It's not a body. It's worse. Personal effects. Items identified as belonging to the victim. Objects she would not have willingly parted with. Items that place her in this house, at some point after she vanished. The implication is immediate and devastating. The suspect's face drains of color. He says nothing. Silence can be louder than confession. The items are logged, photographed, sealed. The chain of custody is immaculate. This is the kind of evidence cold cases dream of. The kind that doesn't rely on interpretation. The kind that speaks for itself. The arrest comes hours later. No resistance. No outburst. Just resignation. The headline spreads fast. Cold case cracked. Killer lived next door. The community reels. Shock ripples outward. People replay memories with new understanding. Smiles reinterpreted. Gestures reassessed. Safety feels retroactively fraudulent. Parents wonder how close their children came. Everyone asks the same question. How did we not see it? But the case isn't over. Because one truth still hasn't surfaced. Where is she? The suspect refuses to talk. Lawyered up.
Silent.
The evidence is strong, but incomplete. Without a body, without a final location, the story remains unfinished. Closure dangles just out of reach. The detective stands outside the interrogation room, listening to nothing. He knows this silence. It's not defiance. It's control. The last thing the suspect has left. And as the case barrels toward trial, as the community braces for details it may not survive hearing, one question hovers over everything. If he planned this well enough to hide the truth for years, what else is still hidden? Silence becomes the loudest sound in the building. The interrogation room is sterile, unforgiving. White walls, metal table, a single camera fixed like an unblinking eye. The suspect sits motionless, hands folded, gaze unfocused. He has been here before, years ago, when questions were gentle and answers were easy. Now, there are no gentle questions left. He says nothing. His attorney does the talking. Polite, controlled, surgical. Every sentence designed to stop time from moving forward. Requests are filed. Motions prepared. The legal machinery hums to life, grinding slowly, deliberately. Justice, when delayed long enough, begins to feel theoretical. Outside the room, the detective waits. He has learned not to expect confessions. Not from men like this. Confession requires rupture, a break in the internal order. This suspect is built on containment. He didn't survive years next door by being impulsive. He survived by mastering restraint. And restraint is hard to crack. The evidence now has weight. The personal items recovered from the house shift the case from suspicion to inevitability. But inevitability is not the same as certainty. Defense teams thrive in that gap. They will argue planting, misidentification, coincidence layered on coincidence until doubt feels reasonable. The detective prepares for that fight. He works backward again, from the hidden compartment to the moment it was sealed. From the moment it was sealed to the reason it existed at all. People don't hide souvenirs unless the act itself mattered. Unless possession was part of the crime. A private confirmation that the world didn't see. The profiler's words echo in his mind. Someone who planned to live with it. Living with it means revisiting it, returning to it, checking that it's still there, that nothing has shifted, that control remains intact. The hiding place wasn't about concealment alone. It was about reassurance. The detective requests a forensic re-examination of everything. Fibers from the suspect's house, dust from the crawl space, microscopic traces that might have transferred during the crime. The lab obliges, cautiously optimistic. Time has degraded much, but not all. While science works, the court of public opinion ignites. News vans crowd the street. Headlines escalate from shock to outrage. Neighbors speak on camera, voices trembling, eyes darting toward the house that once felt ordinary. Some cry. Some are angry. Some refuse to talk at all. Trauma fractures expression in unpredictable ways. Everyone wants answers. The one person who has them stays silent. Search efforts resume, fueled by renewed urgency.
Fields are rescanned.
Areas previously dismissed are reconsidered. Cadaver dogs work through heat and brush, noses low, tails stiff with focus. Hope is careful now measured. Too many years have passed for optimism to be anything but restrained. Nothing is found. Each failed search compounds the ache. Because every day without her is another day the story remains incomplete. Another day the suspect holds the final chapter hostage. Inside the jail, he maintains routine.
Eats. Sleeps. Reads.
Speaks only when necessary. Guards describe him as calm, almost relieved. As if the long tension of concealment has finally been replaced by structure. Bars are simpler than secrets. The detective studies this behavior closely. Relief suggests release. Release suggests exhaustion. Exhaustion creates cracks. He requests a monitored conversation. A calculated risk. The suspect is placed in a room with someone he once trusted. A family member. Not to interrogate, but to listen. The microphones are hidden. The cameras discreet. The conversation starts mundane. Health. Weather. Logistics. Then it drifts. The suspect speaks in abstractions.
About mistakes.
About people misinterpreting intentions. About how the world punishes those who are misunderstood. He never mentions her. Not once. It's as if saying her name would give her power. But he says something else. He talks about permanence. About things being placed where they won't be disturbed. About knowing a place so well you can disappear something inside it. The words hang in the air. Investigators mark the timestamp. The search radius tightens again. They revisit areas connected not just geographically, but psychologically. Places the suspect frequented. Locations tied to comfort, not convenience. Somewhere he would return to mentally, if not physically. Somewhere that belonged to him in ways paperwork never could. A site emerges. Remote. Unassuming. Ignored. The first dig yields nothing. The second, less. The third hits resistance. It's shallow. Too shallow for permanence. Too deliberate for chance. The soil tells a story before anything else does.
Disturbed.
Refilled. Compressed by hands that knew exactly how much effort to apply. They dig carefully. The discovery is not cinematic. No dramatic reveal. No sudden clarity. Just confirmation. The remains are fragmentary. Time has done its work. Nature has taken its share. But there is no doubt. This is her. The missing presence that haunted the neighborhood for years is finally, devastatingly real. The call goes out. The detective closes his eyes when he hears it. Not in relief. In grief. Because answers don't undo loss. They only give it shape. The community mourns again. Properly this time. Vigils form. Candles flicker. Names are spoken aloud that were once whispered. The silence that began this case finally breaks, replaced by something heavier but honest. The suspect is informed. He reacts with nothing. No denial. No emotion. Just a nod. The final control is gone. Trial preparations accelerate. The narrative is now complete. The pieces align. The hidden items. The proximity. The remains. The psychology. Each element reinforces the other, forming a structure too solid to dismantle easily. But cold cases have one final cruelty. They make everyone wait. As the trial date approaches, the detective returns to the street one last time. The houses look smaller now, less ominous. The illusion has collapsed, replaced by clarity. Evil didn't arrive here. It was already invited in. He stands between the two houses and imagines the moment again. Not with speculation this time, but with knowledge. The door opening. The trust. The quiet efficiency of betrayal. And he understands something that will never leave him. Justice came late. Truth came slower. But silence did not win. Because even the best hidden crimes leave echoes. And eventually, echoes are heard. The courtroom is colder than anyone expects. Not in temperature, but in tone. Wood polished to a dull shine. Flags standing motionless. Rows of benches filled with people who have waited years for this moment and still don't know how to sit inside it. Justice has a posture, and everyone is trying to learn it at once. The suspect enters without spectacle. No shackles visible. No outburst. Just a man walking into the consequences of a life carefully compartmentalized. He looks smaller here. Not diminished, contained. As if the room itself has finally matched the internal architecture he's lived inside for so long. The detective takes his seat behind the prosecution. He doesn't look at the defendant. He looks at the empty chair reserved for the victim. Opening statements begin, and the story unfolds not as a mystery, but as a reconstruction. Prosecutors don't ask the jury to imagine what might have happened. They show them how it could only have happened one way.
Proximity.
Access. Opportunity. Control. Each word is placed carefully, like a brick in a wall meant to hold. The defense counters with time. They talk about degradation, about lost evidence, about memory shaped by grief and suggestion. They paint the investigation as a narrative built backward, a man chosen first and evidence collected later. They never say innocent. They say uncertain. Doubt is more flexible. More useful. Witnesses take the stand. Neighbors. Co-workers. Experts. Each one adds a layer, not of drama, but of texture. The jury hears about routines, about sounds dismissed, about comments that felt wrong only in hindsight. It's not explosive. It's cumulative. The kind of testimony that doesn't shock, but settles. The forensic evidence lands harder. The hidden items. The partial DNA. The soil composition matching the burial site. Each piece speaks without emotion. Science doesn't accuse. It indicates. And indication, repeated often enough, becomes direction. The defendant remains still. No reaction. No denial. No visible strain. That unnerves the room more than anger ever could. The detective watches closely. This is not indifference. This is endurance. The profiler testifies next. Carefully, conservatively. No grand claims. Just behavioral analysis grounded in evidence. Planning.
Control.
Familiarity. The ability to maintain normalcy while concealing violence. The jury listens differently now. The pieces they've been handed begin to assemble themselves. Then comes the moment everyone anticipates. The defendant is offered the chance to speak. His attorney advises against it. The risk is enormous. Silence has protected him for years. But something has shifted. The remains were found. The narrative is nearly complete. Control, once absolute, is now slipping.
He stands.
The room holds its breath. His voice is calm, measured, almost instructional. He doesn't confess. He doesn't deny. He talks about misunderstanding, about how stories take on lives of their own, about how proximity becomes suspicion when fear needs a shape. He never says her name. The prosecution doesn't interrupt. They let him speak, because every word reveals more than it conceals. His language is abstract,
detached.
He speaks in concepts, not events, as if distance itself could absolve him. When he sits, the silence is heavy. The detective feels it then. Not victory. Not relief. Finality. Closing arguments strip the case to its core.
Not spectacle.
Not emotion. Just inevitability. The prosecution reminds the jury of the simplest truth. Crimes like this don't require monsters. They require access.
Time.
And the belief that no one is watching. The jury leaves. Waiting returns. Hours stretch. Then days. The community holds itself together on routine alone. People work.
Eat.
Sleep. All of it feels provisional, as if life is paused until a word is spoken. The verdict arrives on a gray afternoon.
Guilty.
Not shouted. Not celebrated. Just stated. The word lands with a weight that has nothing to do with volume. The defendant shows no visible reaction. If there is anything happening inside him, it remains sealed. Control, even now, is his final language. Sentencing is swift. Decades. Numbers that exceed a lifespan. The judge speaks about trust, about proximity, about the quiet devastation of betrayal. The words are formal, but the message is not. This was not just a crime against one person. It was a fracture in a community's understanding of safety. As the defendant is led away, the detective finally looks at him. For the briefest moment, their eyes meet. There is no triumph there. No apology. Just recognition. The courtroom empties slowly. People linger, unsure what to do with closure that arrived so late. Outside, cameras wait. Statements are made. Words like justice and resolution are used carefully, as if they might break. But the truth is quieter. Nothing returns what was lost. Nothing repairs the years lived in uncertainty. The detective leaves alone. He drives past the neighborhood one last time, watching the houses slide by like chapters already read. The street looks ordinary again. But ordinary is no longer innocent. It is simply what remains after illusion collapses. At a red light, he thinks about the beginning. The unlocked door. The quiet house. The absence that started everything. Cold cases don't end cleanly. They taper off, leaving echoes behind. Questions that will never be answered. Moments that will never be fully understood. But some echoes fade. This one won't. Because long after the verdict, long after the sentence, long after the headlines are forgotten, one truth will remain embedded in this place. The danger was never out there. It was always right next door. After the verdict, the noise dies first. Cameras leave. Trucks roll away. Reporters stop calling. The courthouse empties, and with it goes the illusion that something has been finished. What remains is quieter, heavier, and harder to name. Justice has been pronounced, but it hasn't been absorbed. Not yet. The community exhales in fragments. Some people feel relief and mistake it for peace. Others feel anger they don't know where to put. A few feel shame, the private kind, the kind that never makes it into interviews. Because living next to evil for years without recognizing it forces a question no one wants to answer. What did we choose not to see? The street returns to routine, but routine is different now.
Doors close faster.
Conversations stay on the surface. Neighbors wave, then wonder why they waved at all. Trust, once broken this quietly, doesn't announce its absence. It simply stops showing up. The house stands empty. Boards on the windows. A sign in the yard that means nothing to anyone who doesn't know the story. Realtors talk about location, square footage, potential. They don't talk about memory. Memory isn't on the listing. Across the fence, the victim's home feels altered too. Not haunted, hollowed. As if the years of uncertainty carved something out that can never be rebuilt. Family members come and go. They touch walls. They stand in doorways. They listen for echoes that aren't there. Closure is not a door that shuts. It's a room you learn to occupy. The detective returns to work. New cases. New names. New urgency. But this one follows him in quieter ways. In the way he now studies neighbors during interviews. In the way proximity no longer reads as comfort. In the way he never again dismisses the ordinary. Cold cases leave marks on the people who solve them. Not pride. Not triumph. A recalibration. He lectures new detectives months later, never naming the case outright. He talks about assumptions. About the danger of shortcuts, disguised as common sense. About how often the truth hides behind politeness, routine, and the belief that monsters look different than we do. He doesn't mention the street. He doesn't need to. The profiler publishes a paper. Stripped of names. Stripped of place. It talks about concealment over years, about offenders who don't flee but remain, who prefer proximity because it offers surveillance, control, and the perverse comfort of normalcy. Academics debate it. Students underline passages. None of them feel the weight behind the words. The family does. They hold a private ceremony. No cameras. No speeches. Just presence. They place something small where she was found. Nothing that announces itself. Something meant to be discovered only by those who know to look. Grief, after years of uncertainty, becomes quieter but no less dense. At night, the street sounds the same. Wind through trees. A distant car. A dog barking once, then settling. But the silence has changed. It's no longer empty. It's occupied by memory. By the understanding that safety is not guaranteed by geography or familiarity. That danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in so well it becomes part of the landscape. People move away. Others move in. They're told pieces of the story. Never all of it. Just enough to be careful. Just enough to respect the space. Some listen. Some don't. Life insists on continuing, even when it probably shouldn't. The detective drives by one evening, long after the case is closed. The sun is low. The houses look almost gentle in the light. For a moment, if he lets himself, he can imagine nothing ever happened here. He doesn't let himself. Because forgetting is how this kind of thing survives. Cold cases don't just ask who did it. They ask how long it took to notice. And even when the answer finally arrives, even when the truth steps into the light, the shadow it casts doesn't disappear. It stretches backward, over years, over choices, over glances that never lingered long enough. The killer lived next door. That sentence will never stop being unsettling. Not because of what it says about him, but because of what it says about us. About how close we are to the stories we think only happen somewhere else. The street sleeps again. But it will never dream the same way. Time moves forward, but it doesn't move on. Long after the case is stamped closed, long after the files are archived again under a different classification, questions linger in the spaces no document can reach. They don't demand answers the way investigators do. They wait. Patient. Persistent. The kind of questions that surface late at night, when certainty loosens its grip. What if someone had noticed sooner? What if a sound hadn't been dismissed? What if proximity had been treated as a risk instead of a comfort? These questions don't accuse. They haunt. The detective knows better than to chase them. There is no jurisdiction over regret. Still, he feels their pull when he reviews other cases, when a neighbor is waved off too quickly, when a timeline is accepted because it's convenient. This case rewired his instincts. It taught him that the most dangerous assumptions are the quiet ones. The evidence, now cataloged and sealed, tells a story that feels complete on paper. But reality is messy. There are gaps that no verdict can fill. Moments unobserved. Thoughts unspoken. Decisions made in silence that shaped everything afterward. Cold cases rarely give you the luxury of total understanding. They give you enough. In the months following the sentencing, journalists circle back with different questions. Not what happened, but how it went unnoticed. They interview experts, psychologists, sociologists. They talk about suburban anonymity, about how closeness can create blind spots, about how familiarity dulls vigilance. It's framed as analysis, but underneath it hums a deeper discomfort. If it happened here, it can happen anywhere. The story migrates. It becomes a podcast episode, a documentary segment, a cautionary tale retold with careful language and ominous music. Details are dramatized, timelines compressed. Audiences lean in, shocked not by the violence, but by the proximity. Comment sections fill with disbelief, then recognition. I knew someone like that. That could be my street. That's terrifying. The victim's name trends briefly, then fades again. Not forgotten, just folded back into the long archive of public memory. Awareness has a short half-life. The family notices. They always notice. Each retelling is a reopening, a careful weighing of whether the exposure honors or erodes what was lost. They choose silence more often now. They know the truth. That's enough. But silence doesn't erase curiosity. People still ask why the suspect never confessed. Why he took the secret with him so carefully, even when exposure was inevitable. The profiler offers a theory, never a conclusion. Control, once surrendered, cannot be reclaimed. Silence becomes the final assertion of autonomy, the last boundary he could enforce. It's an explanation, not an answer. The house is sold eventually. Renovated, brightened, the hollow spaces filled. Walls repainted in colors meant to suggest warmth. New owners move in, assured they are safe. Legally, they are. The danger has been removed. Psychologically, the ground is less stable. They learn the story in fragments. A neighbor mentions it casually. A search result confirms it. They stand in rooms, recalibrating, measuring, wondering. The house holds nothing tangible now. No evidence. No residue. Just knowledge. Knowledge is enough to change how space feels. Some nights, they hear normal sounds and feel something else entirely. The detective retires quietly. No ceremony. No speeches. Just a final walk out of the building with a box of personal items and a career condensed into cardboard. This case sits among others in his memory, but it carries a distinct weight. Not because it was the worst, but because it was the closest. He lives in a different neighborhood now. Still suburban. Still quiet. Still ordinary. He knows better than to believe that means anything. On anniversaries, small gestures appear in public places. Flowers. Notes. Not many. Just enough to acknowledge the passage of time. Strangers pause when they see them, sensing significance without understanding it fully. Memory works like that. It signals without explaining. The case changed how the department trains its officers. Proximity is no longer neutral. Familiarity is no longer comforting by default. Assumptions are treated like evidence, dangerous unless tested. That may be the only measurable legacy. The only way something like this can justify its own existence. Through prevention. Through altered behavior. Through vigilance sharpened by loss. Still, the unanswered questions persist. What was the moment of decision like? Was there hesitation? Did he ever almost stop? These questions belong to the void now. They don't matter to justice. They matter only to curiosity, and curiosity has no jurisdiction. The truth does not owe us completeness. Cold cases teach this lesson slowly, painfully. You don't solve them to feel better. You solve them to stop guessing. And even then, the guessing doesn't entirely end. The street looks unremarkable to anyone passing through. Another line of houses. Another place where nothing seems to happen. That's the most unsettling part. The absence of markers. The ease with which a location absorbs its own history. But for those who know, the street is layered. Every driveway holds two versions of the past. The one people lived.
And the one they didn't see.
The killer lived next door. That fact will always resist normalization. It refuses to become trivia. It stays sharp, no matter how often it's repeated, because it exposes something fundamental and uncomfortable. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it smiles and waves. And sometimes it lives close enough to hear you breathe. Long after the last headline fades, the case keeps working. Not on paper. On people. Psychologists call it residual trauma. Communities call it something else, a feeling that never quite leaves. The sense that the ground under familiar routines is thinner than it looks. That safety is conditional,
Temporary.
subject to revision. The street doesn't talk about it openly anymore. But the case has rewired behavior in ways that don't need language. Doors are locked earlier. Porch lights stay on longer. Neighbors learn each other's schedules with a new kind of attention. Not curiosity. Surveillance. Trust becomes procedural. People don't mean to live this way. It just happens. The body remembers before the mind does. A sound in the night triggers alertness where there used to be dismissal. A knock at the door carries weight it never had before. Familiarity no longer equals harmlessness. This is the invisible aftermath of a cold case. The department tracks it too. Reports show a subtle rise in neighbor-related tips. Not hysteria. Not paranoia. Just awareness sharpened by history. Officers are trained to listen differently now, to treat proximity as information rather than reassurance. The case becomes a reference point, never cited directly, always present. An unspoken lesson. Cold cases don't end when the suspect is sentenced. They end when the systems around them change. When patterns are interrupted. When the next potential silence is noticed sooner than the last. Still, there are costs. The victim's family lives in a different rhythm now. Grief that once revolved around uncertainty has settled into something heavier, more precise. Knowing what happened doesn't soften the loss. It sharpens it. It gives grief edges. They are asked to speak sometimes. Panels. Awareness events. Training seminars. They decline more often than they accept. Telling the story is exhausting. Reopening the wound in public requires a kind of strength they don't always have. They keep their memories private. The suspect, now a number in a system built to neutralize him, fades from public view. Appeals are filed. Denied. Filed again. The language grows more technical, less emotional. The world outside moves on. Inside, his life collapses into routine. Meals.
Counts.
Lights out. Some guards say he remains calm. Some say he talks in his sleep. No one knows what that means. The profiler revisits the case years later, not for analysis, but for closure. She reads old notes, transcripts, statements that once felt urgent and now feel distant. One sentence stands out to her, something she said early on without fully understanding its weight. He planned to live with it. She realizes now how accurate that was. Not just in the years of concealment, but in the way the crime embedded itself into the environment, into habits, into assumptions, into the invisible architecture of daily life. Living with it wasn't just his plan. It became everyone else's burden too. True crime audiences dissect the case online, years removed from its impact. They debate theories that no longer matter. They speculate about motives that died with the verdict. For them, the case is content. For the community, it's history that still breathes. The difference is distance. Distance turns pain into curiosity. Proximity turns curiosity into fear. The detective receives an email one evening from a young officer he trained. The officer thanks him, says a recent call felt different because of something he once said about assumptions. About listening when something feels ordinary but wrong. The detective reads it twice. This is how cold cases justify themselves. Not by answers. By prevention. He deletes the email afterward, not because it isn't important, but because he doesn't need proof anymore. He carries enough of it. On the street, a new family hosts a block party. Music plays. Laughter spills across lawns. Children run, without knowing why their parents watch them so closely. The scene looks normal. Almost hopeful.
And it is.
Life doesn't stop because something terrible happened once. It adapts. It absorbs. It learns. That doesn't mean it forgets. The street has learned. Every shared glance contains a quiet understanding. That vigilance is not fear. That attention is not paranoia. That seeing clearly is the price of believing in safety again. Cold cases teach communities this lesson slowly. Sometimes too slowly. The phrase still circulates, resurfacing in conversations, in documentaries, in the minds of those who hear the story for the first time. The killer lived next door. It endures because it dismantles distance. It forces recognition. It removes the comfort of elsewhere. It insists that danger is not a category, but a condition, one that can exist anywhere, given the right silence. And silence, left unchecked, is not neutral. It is space. Space for assumptions. Space for routine. Space for someone to hide in plain sight. This case closed a file, but it opened something else, a fracture in certainty that will never fully heal. And maybe that's necessary. Maybe certainty is overrated. Maybe vigilance is the more honest state. Because the most unsettling truth this case leaves behind is not about one man, or one street, or 1 year in California. It's about how close the truth always is. Closer than we think. Years later, the file still gets pulled. Not because it's active. Because it's useful. At the academy, instructors refer to it without naming it. Slides show timelines stripped of emotion.
Dates.
Missed opportunities. A single decision highlighted in red. Recruits are asked the same question every class. Where would you have looked differently? There is no correct answer. That's the point. Cold cases survive because they expose how fragile certainty is, how easily logic bends to convenience, how quickly assumptions harden into blind spots. The case becomes a mirror more than a mystery, reflecting not what investigators didn't know, but what they thought they already understood. Familiar neighborhood. No forced entry. No clear motive. So attention drifted elsewhere. The instructor pauses the slide and lets the silence work. Silence is a teaching tool now. A reminder that what isn't said can be as dangerous as what is. The original detective never attends these sessions. He doesn't need to. His influence is already there, embedded in the cautionary tone, in the emphasis on revisiting the obvious. He hears about it secondhand, usually in passing, usually understated. Your case came up again. He nods, like someone hearing an old song through a wall. At home, the evidence boxes sit in storage. He keeps meaning to throw them out. Case law says he can. Closure says he should. Something else stops him every time. Not sentimentality. Responsibility. Because cases don't really belong to the past. They wait. Technology continues to advance, quietly rewriting the limits of memory. A technique that didn't exist during the investigation is now standard. Data once considered useless is suddenly actionable. What was noise becomes signal. Cold cases age differently because truth does not decay at the same rate as opportunity. The victim's name still appears in databases, linked forever to a year that no longer feels real. New detectives encounter it without context, without fear, without the emotional weight that shaped the original investigation. That distance is an advantage. They see patterns the first team couldn't afford to imagine. One of them notices something small. Not a clue, a behavior. A recurring absence. A name that appears often enough to feel intentional, but never enough to feel suspicious. The kind of detail that hides in plain sight when urgency dominates perspective. It triggers a quiet review. No press. No announcement. Just curiosity. That's how cold cases move now.
Slowly.
Methodically. Without drama. They don't chase answers. They wait for them to reveal themselves. The suspect is already convicted, already aging, already classified as resolved. But cases are not solved in isolation. They exist in ecosystems of information connected by habits, locations, routines that repeat across time. Patterns don't respect verdicts. A second file opens. Related. Adjacent. Uncomfortable. The department debates whether it's worth pursuing. Resources are finite. Outcomes uncertain. The argument ends the way it always does, with a question that can't be dismissed. What if we're wrong again? The community doesn't hear about this. They believe the story ended years ago. That's how they prefer it. Endings are easier than revisions. Easier than learning that resolution can be provisional. But somewhere in a quiet office, someone is reconsidering a conclusion that once felt permanent. This is the second life of a cold case. Not the one that makes headlines. The one that prevents the next one. Because every solved case carries a warning label, handled once. Subject to re-examination. The detective, older now, reads a brief memo forwarded without comment. He recognizes the phrasing immediately, the cautious language, the deliberate lack of certainty. He exhales slow. Not relief. Recognition. The case isn't haunting him anymore. It's working. And that may be the only justice cold cases ever fully deliver, not the comfort of finality, but the discipline of doubt. The refusal to assume that silence means nothing happened, or that familiarity means safety. Cold cases don't ask to be remembered. They insist on it. Because somewhere, right now, something feels ordinary. And that's exactly where the next story begins. The house still stands. Fresh paint. New owners. Different cars in the driveway. At night, lights flick on and off behind curtains that don't remember what they've seen. Children ride bikes past it now. Delivery trucks stop. Life continues with the quiet confidence that comes from not knowing. No plaque. No warning. No sign that something irreversible once happened inside those walls. That's how cold cases end when they never truly end. Not with answers, but with normalcy reclaiming the crime scene inch by inch, year by year, until horror becomes unrecognizable beneath routine. The victim's name is spoken less frequently now. Not out of disrespect, but exhaustion. Grief cannot stay sharp forever. Families age. Witnesses disappear. Memory softens, even when justice doesn't. What remains is paperwork, files, digital shadows, a timeline frozen at its last verified moment. Investigators know the feeling well. The quiet after effort. The strange calm that follows years of pursuit when there's nothing left to chase except doubt. They tell themselves they did everything right, and most of the time they believe it. But belief is not proof. The final report never uses the word closure. It uses terms like inactive, no further leads, case status unchanged. Language designed to lower expectations, not raise truth. Cold case. Two words that sound clinical, neutral, almost polite, but they carry weight. They mean someone didn't come home. Someone waited by a phone that never rang. Someone learned how to live with questions instead of answers. They mean a community learned the wrong lesson, that danger announces itself, that monsters look different, that evil leaves fingerprints obvious enough to follow. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it lives next door. Sometimes it waves. Sometimes it borrows sugar and returns it. And sometimes it leaves no trace strong enough to survive time. The investigators move on. They have to. New calls come in. New scenes. New lives fractured in familiar ways. The job does not pause for unresolved stories. It stacks them. Yet every so often, usually late, usually alone, someone opens the file again. Not because they expect a breakthrough, because something about it still resists being put away. A detail that doesn't align. A silence that feels intentional. A question no one ever phrased the right way. Cold cases don't fade evenly. They linger in fragments, in instincts, in the quiet discomfort that tells you a story ended too neatly, too cleanly, too soon. The community sleeps. The house stays quiet. The year on the file never changes. California, 2003. Cold case. Uncracked. Unfinished. Unforgiving. And as long as it remains unsolved, it does what all unanswered crimes do best. It reminds us that certainty is fragile, safety is often assumed, and the truth does not always surface on schedule. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. And sometimes it disappears into the ordinary, leaving behind only one haunting possibility. That the story isn't over. We just stopped listening. Silence settles differently when it has lasted this long. It's no longer loud. It's no longer sharp. It becomes atmospheric, like fog that no one questions anymore. The case exists now in the margins, not forgotten, but downgraded in priority, filed beneath emergencies, beneath solvable things, beneath the urgent noise of the present. That's how time wins. Not by erasing, but by rearranging importance. The last confirmed lead is decades old. The ink has faded. The voices on the tapes sound younger than they should. People speak with certainty about things they were wrong about and hesitation about things they were right to doubt. Listen closely, and you can hear it. A pause too long. An answer too quick. A laugh where there shouldn't be one. These recordings aren't evidence anymore. They're artifacts. Proof of how humans behave when they think the worst is already behind them. Somewhere, the suspect or suspects continue living inside ordinary routines. Work. Sleep. Conversations about weather and traffic. The crime becomes a memory that only exists when they allow it to. And they rarely do. That's the cruel symmetry of unsolved cases. The victims are remembered by strangers. The perpetrators are protected by familiarity. Cold cases age in a world that rewards adaptation. The longer a secret survives, the more it blends into identity. Guilt, if it exists, becomes background noise. Fear turns into confidence. And confidence looks a lot like innocence to anyone not trained to see the difference. Investigators know this pattern. They talk about it quietly in hallways between cases that still have blood on the floor. They know time is not neutral. It benefits someone. It always does. They revisit the neighborhood maps again. Streets renamed. Houses remodeled. Property lines shifted. The geography of the crime has changed, but the emotional topography hasn't. There are still places that feel wrong. Corners where conversations stopped abruptly. Windows that were never opened again. A door that was repainted too soon. These are not facts. They are impressions. And impressions don't hold up in court. But they don't go away either. The cold case unit keeps the file alive with minimal effort, an occasional cross-check, a database scan, a quiet update when technology allows it. No hope. Just maintenance. Like keeping a light on in a room no one enters anymore. Because turning it off feels like surrender. Every few years, the case resurfaces in public memory. An anniversary, a podcast mention, a grainy photo circulating online with a caption that asks the same tired question. Do you remember anything? Most people don't. Or they remember the wrong things. Memory is unreliable, especially when fear was involved. Especially when the truth would require admitting that danger felt familiar. That's the part no one likes to confront. The crime didn't come from outside. It didn't announce itself. It didn't look suspicious until it was too late. And that makes everyone complicit in a way they'd rather not examine. The file closes again. The office lights go off. The case returns to its unnatural hibernation. But somewhere, in a gesture, a habit, a story told one too many times, the truth still exists. Intact. Waiting for the wrong person to say the right thing. Or the right person to finally stop protecting the wrong memory. Cold cases don't demand justice. They wait for mistakes. And time, patient and indifferent, keeps giving them chances. Time has a way of rearranging guilt. It doesn't erase it. It redistributes it. What once belonged to a single moment begins to scatter, across conversations, across decisions made in silence, across people who told themselves they were helping by saying nothing. Years pass, and the crime no longer feels like an act. It feels like a condition. Unsolved. Unclaimed. Uncomfortable. The case breathes through other cases now. A line in a spreadsheet. A reference in a briefing. A footnote in a lesson about assumptions. It has become a template, not for how to solve a crime, but for how one slips through the cracks while everyone is watching somewhere else. There is a witness who never testified. Not because they weren't asked, because they were too certain their memory was irrelevant. They replay a moment occasionally, a sound, a glance, a timing that never made sense. They don't call it regret. They call it coincidence. Coincidences are convenient. There is a neighbor who moved away shortly after.
Not fleeing.
Just changing scenery. They tell the story differently now, sanding down the edges, removing themselves from the frame. With enough repetition, it becomes the truth they believe. There is a detective who still dreams about the house. Not the crime, the layout. Hallways that felt too narrow. A door that closed too softly. In the dream, he notices something obvious. In the dream, it's too late. The case does not ask for attention anymore. It has learned patience. It understands how humans work. We chase what moves. We ignore what stays still. Cold cases stay still on purpose. They let the world change around them. They let certainty grow where doubt should live. They let the guilty age into credibility and the innocent age into silence. Somewhere an object still exists. Not hidden. Not destroyed. Just overlooked. A thing that never mattered until it did, and then mattered too much to mention. Objects are honest that way. They don't forget. They just wait to be recognized. The file receives another update. Minor. Administrative. A change in status language that means nothing and everything at the same time. Words adjusted to reflect reality without challenging it. No resolution. No accusation. No relief. The community remembers the case the way it remembers storms. Intense, disruptive, then absorbed into history. They tell themselves it couldn't happen again. They tell themselves it was an exception. Exceptions are comforting. But the truth is quieter. The truth says the conditions still exist. The same blind spots. The same trust in the familiar. The same urge to believe that danger looks different than it does. Cold cases don't scare people because they're violent. They scare people because they're plausible. Because the story fits too well into ordinary life. Because nothing about it required a monster. Just timing. Just access. Just one moment where everyone assumed someone else was paying attention. The house remains. The street remains. The question remains. And every year that passes without an answer doesn't close the case. It teaches it how to hide better. Eventually, even the people closest to the truth begin to doubt its shape. Memory degrades, not all at once, but selectively. Sharp edges blur. Certainty softens into suggestion. What was once I saw becomes I think. What was once that night turns into around that time. The mind protects itself by editing. Cold cases rely on what survives that process. A former investigator revisits his notes one last time before retirement. Not officially. Not on the clock. Just a quiet moment, alone, leafing through handwriting that no longer feels like his own. He notices how often the word assumed appears. Assumed safe. Assumed unrelated. Assumed coincidence. Assumptions are invisible until they fail. He lingers on a name. Not underlined. Not circled. Just present. Too present. The name was always there, threaded through reports like background noise. Familiar enough to fade. Harmless enough to ignore. Next door. Close enough to hear. Close enough to know. The realization doesn't arrive as shock. It arrives as fatigue. The kind that comes from understanding that the answer may have been available for years, waiting behind politeness, behind the instinct not to accuse what feels normal. He closes the file without marking it. Some insights come too late to act on, or maybe too late to prove. Outside, the world has moved on. New houses, new families, new routines layered over old ground. The crime scene is now someone's kitchen, someone's hallway, someone's safe place. That's the final cruelty of unsolved cases. They don't stay contained. They dissolve into everyday life, leaving behind only a residue of unease for those who know where to look. The cold case unit receives fewer resources each year. Budgets favor outcomes. Metrics reward closure. Mysteries without deadlines are easy to postpone indefinitely. And yet, the file remains accessible. Not because anyone expects a confession or a breakthrough, but because removing it would feel dishonest. As if deleting the record would rewrite reality. Some truths are preserved not for justice, but for accountability. A reminder that the system is fallible. That proximity can be misleading. That evil does not require spectacle. It only requires opportunity. The case ends the way it has always ended, without resolution, without absolution, without peace. It ends in suspension, hovering between what is known and what cannot be proven. California, 2003. Cold case. Not solved, not forgotten, not finished. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of ordinary life, the truth continues to exist, unchanged, unconfessed, waiting for a moment when silence finally becomes heavier than fear. The weight of an unsolved case doesn't disappear. It transfers. It settles into habits, into institutional memory, into the subtle way investigators hesitate before dismissing something that feels too close to be dangerous. The case becomes a ghost protocol, never spoken aloud, but always present. A new generation joins the department. They know the story only in fragments. A lecture, a cautionary anecdote, a reference in a training manual where the margins are crowded with notes written by people who no longer work there. They ask about it once. They are told just enough. Cold cases are taught like scars. Not to scare, to warn. Outside the system, life continues unburdened by that knowledge. The neighborhood has no memory of what it once held. Children grow up unaware that the sidewalks they run across were once cordoned off with tape. That their laughter now fills a silence that used to be absolute. Time doesn't heal places. It replaces them. The suspect, if there ever was one, has learned how to disappear without leaving. Not by fleeing, but by staying. By blending into the expected arc of a life. Age becomes an alibi. Routine becomes camouflage. People trust consistency. That's what makes the absence of resolution so corrosive. Not the lack of punishment, the lack of certainty. The possibility that the truth has been folded into something unremarkable, indistinguishable from everyone else's day-to-day existence. A file marked inactive is not a file marked wrong. It's a file marked unfinished. Every few years, a tip arrives. Anonymous.
Vague.
Often fueled by guilt or imagination. Most lead nowhere. Some reopen wounds. None provide relief. Relief requires answers. And answers require disruption. Cold cases resist disruption because they've already survived it. They endured the chaos of initial discovery, the urgency of early investigation, the pressure of public attention. What remains is hardened by time. Stable. Inert. Dangerously quiet. The story ends, as it must, without a conclusion. Not because the truth is unknowable, but because it refuses to surface on command. It exists independent of timing, indifferent to expectation. That is the final lesson. Justice is not guaranteed. Closure is not promised. And proximity is not protection. Somewhere, someone still knows what happened. Someone still remembers a detail they've convinced themselves doesn't matter. Someone still lives inside the shadow of a moment they believed would fade. It hasn't. California, 2003. Cold case. The file remains open in theory, closed in practice, alive in consequence. And as long as it stays that way, it will continue to do what unsolved cases do best. Remind us that the most unsettling truths are not the ones hidden in darkness, but the ones hiding in plain sight. There's a moment, years after the noise has died, when a case stops feeling like a failure and starts feeling like a warning. Not dramatic, not loud, just persistent. It shows up in small decisions. A second look at a report that seems too clean. A pause before writing off a neighbor, a spouse, a familiar face. The cold case rewires instinct, teaching those who inherit it that comfort is not evidence and familiarity is not innocence. The file no longer circulates through official channels, but it circulates through minds. Quietly, uninvited. It becomes part of the professional conscience of the department, an unspoken agreement that some stories don't end just because the calendar insists they should. The original crime scene photos still exist. Digitized.
Archived. Viewed rarely.
When they're opened, it's never for long. Not because they're graphic, but because they're ordinary. A room that looks like any other. Objects placed the way objects are placed every day. That's what unsettles people most. Nothing looks wrong until you know. The case taught that lesson well. Too well. It proved that violence doesn't always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it moves through routine, through access, through trust that has never been challenged. The neighborhood never demanded answers.
Not really.
It wanted reassurance, and reassurance was easier to provide than truth. A suspect elsewhere, a narrative that moved danger away from home. Cold cases thrive in that gap between what people want to believe and what they're afraid to question. Years pass. The legal window narrows. Evidence degrades. Witnesses become unreliable, then unavailable. The case doesn't die, it fossilizes. Preserved but unreachable. And still the truth exists. It doesn't age. It doesn't soften. It doesn't forget. It lives wherever it was left. In a glance held too long. In a habit never explained. In a silence that outlasted every excuse. Some crimes are solved by force.
Some by science.
Some by chance. This one waits for collapse. Of memory, of loyalty, of the careful story someone has been telling themselves for decades. Because that's the final defense of an unsolved crime. Endurance. Outlasting outrage. Outlasting suspicion. Outlasting the people who cared enough to ask. The case has done all of that. California, 2003. Cold case. No sirens now. No tape. No headlines. Just the quiet knowledge that resolution is not the same as truth, and that some answers remain hidden not because they are clever, but because everyone agreed, without ever saying it, to stop looking. In the end, the case doesn't fade out. It recedes, like a sound heard through walls long after the source has stopped moving. Too distant to locate. Too persistent to ignore. The cold case settles into the background of collective awareness, where unresolved things live when they've survived every attempt to be explained. There is no final document. No concluding paragraph. No moment where someone signs their name and closes the book. That only happens in stories. Real cases end differently. They thin out. They lose urgency, then witnesses, then leverage. What remains is implication, a shape without edges, a truth without teeth. And yet, it still exerts pressure. It changes how people look at each other, how investigators listen, how communities interpret silence. It teaches a lesson no one asked for and no one forgets, that the most dangerous assumptions are the comfortable ones. The house continues to exist, not as a crime scene, but as an address. Mail arrives. Trash is collected. People live entire lives inside its walls without ever sensing what once unfolded there. That's not ignorance. That's inheritance. The case belongs to them now, not as responsibility but as context. A reminder embedded in the ordinary that safety is often retroactive, and certainty is usually borrowed. Somewhere, a name still connects all the pieces. It has always been there, waiting, not hidden behind complexity, but shielded by proximity, by the collective instinct to look outward instead of inward. Next door felt too close to be dangerous. Familiar felt too safe to suspect. Normal felt like proof. And that was enough. Cold cases don't demand endings. They survive without them. They persist as open questions in a world that prefers conclusions, as unfinished sentences that no one dares to complete. California, 2003. Cold case. It remains unsolved not because the truth vanished, but because it blended in. Because it learned how to pass as ordinary. Because it lived among people who never imagined they were standing next to it. The story doesn't end with justice. It ends with awareness. With the understanding that some crimes are not buried by time, they are protected by it. And that the line between danger and normalcy is thinner than anyone wants to believe. The tape never rolls again. The voice goes quiet. The file stays where it is. And somewhere, in the calm repetition of daily life, the unanswered question still breathes, patient, intact, waiting for the moment when someone finally looks at what they were always told not to see. Even after everything, the case refuses to become history. History implies distance. This never earned it. It lives closer than that, in cautionary glances, in the unspoken rules passed down through departments, in the instinctive tightening of focus Whenever someone says nothing seemed out of place, those words are never neutral anymore. They carry residue. The cold case changed how absence is interpreted. Not as emptiness, but as intention. Not as failure, but as design. Investigators learned that some crimes succeed not because they are perfect, but because they align too well with normal life. Normal is the best disguise. There were no screams heard that mattered. No neighbors who saw enough to intervene. No moment dramatic enough to anchor memory. Just a window of time. Just access. Just someone who knew the rhythms of the house better than anyone else. That's what made it endure. The files don't circulate anymore, but fragments surface unexpectedly. A line in a report echoes a sentence from years ago. A behavioral pattern in a new case mirrors something once dismissed as coincidence. The past doesn't announce itself. It recognizes itself. Cold cases speak in echoes. The department never reopened the investigation officially. That would require certainty they don't have and promises they can't make. Instead, they let the case exist as a reference point, a quiet comparator against which new assumptions are tested. Is this too familiar? Is this too clean? Is this explanation too easy? Those questions didn't exist before. The victim remains frozen in time, forever the age they were when the case stopped moving. Photographs don't age the way people do. They preserve expressions without context, smiles without futures. The world moved on without them, and that imbalance never corrects itself. That's the real damage of an unsolved case, not the missing verdict, but the missing continuation. Someone was erased mid-sentence. The person responsible, whoever they are, benefited from that erasure. Not just legally, but psychologically. Living unchallenged allows narratives to solidify. Innocence, even if false, becomes habitual. Habit is powerful. Habit convinces. Years without consequence can feel like absolution. But cold cases don't forgive. They don't accuse either. They simply remain, holding space for truth without demanding it arrive on time. They wait for entropy, for a memory to slip, for a story to contradict itself, for silence to finally fracture under its own weight. Until then, the case persists in its most dangerous form. Unresolved, unprovable, and disturbingly plausible. California, 2003. Cold case. No ending card. No resolution, Sharon. Just a story that learned how to survive without closure. And as long as it does, it leaves behind one final unease. The understanding that sometimes the reason a mystery lasts this long isn't because no one knows the answer, but because the answer was standing close enough to be trusted.